So in this second session of the Beyond Grades series, in partnership with Oxford Summer Courses and Summer Discovery, we move from why human skills matter to how schools are embedding them into everyday practice. As expectations from universities, employers, and families continue to evolve, schools are under increasing pressure to develop students who are not only academically strong, but also resilient, self-aware, and capable of navigating complexity. This discussion brings together international school leaders to explore how broader human skills, including social and emotional learning, are being meaningfully integrated into the life of a school, not just as an add-on, but as a core part of the student experience. So a quick word about our sponsors as well, Summer Discovery, who provide life-changing study abroad experiences across the US, Oxford and Cambridge in the UK for students aged 9 right up to the ages of 24. They also have partnered with Fusion Academy to explore how students can use their summer more intentionally, both academically and personally. And Jessica, one of our panelists here from Fusion Academy, will be able to share a bit more about this later on. Jessica will also be co-hosting the session and posing the second and third question to the panel. So yeah, if we can do a quick round of introductions before we get cracking, that would be fantastic. Chris, would you mind kicking us off with your role and the region that you're based in?
No, that's fine. So I'm currently in Vigo, looking after a school, international school in Vigo. I also look after a school in Bilbao. I've been here for 4 years. I've been in Spain now for over 15 years. I've worked in leadership in international schools in Catalonia, Andalusia, País Vasco, and now Galicia. So lots of experience of contrasting international schools, but all have some similar things in their DNA as well. And it's lovely to be here today.
Excellent. Christian, which might go next?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Director of Studies at a school in Madrid in Spain. And I've also got experience mainly in international and in private boarding schools. The last sort of 9 years of my career, I was based in England, and in the last couple of years, I've moved to Madrid in a senior leadership role.
Joel.
Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Joel Worrell. I'm the International Director for Wellington College International Schools. We have 11 international campuses now, and I come from a background of school leadership. So I served as head of 3 international independent schools, and now I'm, I guess, largely poacher turned gamekeeper in building and developing those schools for Wellington College around the world.
Brilliant. Great to have you here, Joel. David?
Hey, everybody. My name is David Turner. Currently, I serve as the College and Career Counselor at the Dwight School here in Dubai. Dwight is part of many different campuses across the globe. Spent a number of years in South Korea where I taught English at university level. I've been in the UAE now for 26 years. But this is super cool to get to meet all these people from Madrid. I just came back from Madrid last week and I absolutely loved it. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Udo. I work for Amity International School based out in Abu Dhabi. I also work for an online school called Minerva Virtual Academy. They're a growing school, one of the largest online schools based out in the UK, and they have a large cohort in the UAE, but they also have students who are living in Spain. We have a lot of Spanish people here. So yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you all.
Kirsten?
Hello, good evening from Singapore. My name is Kirsten Perry. I'm currently serving as a school counselor at Singapore American School. I've been here for 4 years. Prior to that, I was in Chicago Public Schools, where I served in 2 different leadership roles. One of the roles, I was a social and emotional learning specialist, where I coached 27 schools on building comprehensive social emotional learning programs. And the second role was actually as a school counseling specialist, where I coach school counselors throughout the entire district on comprehensive school counseling programs. And then I'm also the author and editor of the book called The ABCs of Social Emotional Learning for School Counselors and Administrators, that was just published by Corwin Press just this past October. So I'm happy to be with everyone today.
Fantastic. Congratulations on that, Kirsten. And Jessica, and maybe just a brief word about your partnership with Summer Discovery and Summer Courses as well.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jessica Michaelenko, post-secondary enrollment manager at Fusion Academy. Fusion Academy has 80 plus campuses all over the US, as well as our Fusion Global Academy that serves students worldwide. We are built on the model that is personalized education, one-to-one learning. And so our students come to us from all different settings. And our hope is that we, in particular with my role, is that we set them up with a strong post-secondary plan where they can reach their future goals. With Summer Discovery, as Max shared, they provide the immersive in-person residential college experience that we would love our students at Fusion Academy to benefit from. We are the premier educational partner for keeping complex top-tier students on track for college success.
Excellent. Well, fantastic to have everyone joining us this afternoon, this evening for Kirsten. So yeah, let's get cracking and move straight into the first question. Like I said, very quickly before I do, one more reiteration. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A rather than the chat box. That would be fantastic. Okay, so we often talk about the importance of human skills like resilience, collaboration, adaptability, but the real challenge is moving beyond intention into consistent practice, essentially how students actually experience them day to day across everything that the school does. So given this context, how are human skills like resilience, collaboration, and adaptability embedded across your individual school contexts? And can you maybe provide a couple of examples of what this looks like in everyday student life in your school? Chris, I'd love to get your thoughts on that one.
Yep, I'm happy to start. Yeah, just as you were outlining that, the word that I kind of resonate most with in that is resilience, because I think it's something that we feel, certainly in the schools here, that we have to develop and nurture and care for more than ever. We know that, my childhood and the way that I went through school is vastly different to the way students are going through their student experiences, and the knocks, the challenges, the information that's bombarded at them. It means that their resilience is gauged and measured differently. In terms of in the schools that I'm part of, Globe Educate, Bilbao and the Vigo schools, giving student a voice is a really, really important way of developing some of those skills. It's used a lot. I sometimes think that it's a phrase that giving student voice and student opportunities, but genuinely doing that, genuinely bedding that into a school in terms of having student leadership teams that have an agenda, that have a manifesto, that have an outcome, can massively develop their confidence and the way that they work together, and also to push back if they come up with a project. We've got a couple of examples here in Vigo where they've actually redefined and redeveloped an area of the campus that was all from them, in a way giving them a voice, a leadership, some money, some time, some resources. My time, a place at the table, means that they can go on a journey through the school, and they can also have some knockbacks if there's something that we didn't like in that project, or if we felt that they needed to present again. We're doing that in a very encouraging way. So I think student leadership groups and student voice, and again, I could talk a lot about how we do that here, but that's really, really important, because it can be a label and it can be something that educational institutions do, but to do it well could be hugely beneficial, and it can develop. And then students see that and join that, and you give the students that are in those leadership groups a platform and assembly. I would say the other thing that very, very briefly, because I'm conscious of time, I think in terms of giving them time outside of the classroom, and again, being in País Vasco and Galicia, the landscape, the ability to do collaborate and skills and practical skills out of the classroom is absolutely on our doorstep and part of our, one of our pillars of the school. And again, that is a very different environment in which the students can learn and collaborate safely, and work as a team in a very different way. And here, ultimately, that evolves, I guess, into something like the Duke of Edinburgh awards that it builds to. But the journey that we go through is very important. And yeah, for me, that word resilience is absolutely key in students and in staff. I'll add that as well. But yeah, that's one example or two.
Thanks, Chris. Joel, does any of that resonate? How are you approaching this at Wellington International?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I think all of it resonates, Max. We know for a long time, I think we considered that the skills that we're talking about were always the byproduct of a good education. So good schools taught well, and as a result, children were resilient and able to problem solve and seek alternative solutions and all of those things just because of the process of the school. And I'm quite pleased that we've realised that actually there's more to it than that, and these explicit systems are needed. I sit as a trustee for the Learning Skills Trust, which is a charity group of schools in the UK and international that are focused on the amalgamation of a skills matrix and a knowledge acquisition process within the context of the curriculum and learning. It's been going since about 2012. There's a number of schools that are involved with it, and I think the biggest transition for the Learning Skills Trust is the development from a junior school model, and in my experience, all the really good stuff comes from the bottom up, not the top down. Our early years educators, they probably lead the way with pedagogy, and then the primary school pick that up and develop it into an older student. And senior school children, they seem to miss out because of that focus on the university placement and sort of further life. But this PSP model is really interesting that it was primary school developed or prep school developed for really years sort of up to year 8. But now it's moved into a year 9 and early secondary model where instead of the senior schools saying, actually, this is a really good system, the children are coming to us better, they're coming more equipped to learn, they're coming with skills as opposed to just knowledge. We're now working with Coventry, we're working with London universities that are saying the same things about their university applicants. And I think that shows real growth in that skill development matrix. So I think among the things that we're doing internationally, that's a pretty good example. I think later on in the session, perhaps it might be worth talking about the work that we're doing with the OECD and the adaptations that PISA are looking to make into human flourishing and skill development, which is a big part of what we've got going on at Wellington. But conscious of others, so let's pause there.
Thanks, Joel. Christian at King's, how are you approaching this?
Well, I think this is something that is fundamental. I'm sure, as discussed in the previous episode relating to embedding human skills. I think it's really important for students to be able to build their self-efficacy, mainly through vicarious experiences. I think it's great for them to not just have experiences that are within the school itself, but being able to see the achievements of others and also the failures of others and learn from that. So I'm a science teacher, a sort of trade by trade. So I'm really keen and with some of my previous work in my previous school as well, to develop those connections, real world connections and real world experience. For example, like having alumni students come in and speak and share experiences, try to get students out from the school and into different workplaces or universities to have snippets of experience where they can see, in a sense, what the next step is, and then hear from other students that have been through those steps what some of the challenges are and how to approach them. I think embedding all that within some form of like challenge as well, or throughout the curriculum, linking to real world aspects of why certain things are important now and what that will lead to in the future. So I think right now my role as Director of Studies, where I'm in charge of sort of curriculum overviews and designing of curriculum, trying to instill that to be able to give students these opportunities is really important.
Thanks, Christian. David at Dwight School Dubai, how are you approaching this with your students?
So I love this question. In fact, I'm looking at Laura and Kirsten, who have also done some college counseling. And what I would say is, if you're a school and you're not looking at doing this, there's a real opportunity to do so. I know that when we have universities come in, and again, Laura, Kirsten, I'm looking for some additional noise on this. That's one thing that they're looking for in an application. A strong applicant is somebody that has more than good grades. And so I've heard the likes of Alice Crichton from Imperial, Arvind Vepa, who's an absolute gem from UCL, Nathan Brennan from LSE have all said the same thing in sessions with me and with students. Supercurriculars are such a heavy component to successful applicants. So as a school, you need to be looking at opportunities for students to engage outside the curriculum. So some of the things I like to do is, in fact, I was just in a session today because of everything that's going on in our region. I have a careers day, and then I have a careers expo, and both of those explore careers by bringing in working professionals. But the real crown gem for me is we have an experience work platform that we do every year. And that's where we actually position students in the workplace for 2 weeks. And I have a digital journal where I've got questions for them that they need to look at. For example, what advice have you received recently from someone there? Is somebody there mentoring you? What kind of advice have they given you? What have you done with it? Getting them involved in workplace and work placements. We have kids who, I was just on a session today with a young lady who has her own business and is getting ready to list it. And so having sessions with her talking about how important an upcoming conversation is. One of the things I like to do early on as well is when it comes time for students to write letters of recommendation, I think it's really important to give students a voice in that. So I have a questionnaire that I provide students where some people call it a brag sheet, where students get to list things that they're doing outside of the classroom. And then the teachers get a copy of that. And then the teacher, while he or she is writing their letter of recommendation, have a chance to understand a little bit more about what kinds of things students are doing outside the classroom. In addition to that, it gives them the opportunity to take those outside experiences and then marry them with some of the things that maybe students are doing in the classroom, whether that's an IA or whether that is an external essay or anything like that. So I'll go back to what I started with. If you're not getting young people involved in super and extracurricular activities, you need to. Last thing I'll say is I'm a big fan of Sarah Hales from Cambridge. And, she came in and one of the things we have to keep in mind is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so there are a lot of people that have paid programs for students to get involved in these things. And I think many of them are great, but not everybody has that financial bandwidth. So one of the things that Sarah said to my students that I really echo as well is she said, listen, you're living in Dubai. I had a student who was applying for architecture who literally had a sketchbook and was able to sketch some of the different buildings and talk about some of the things that she might have done differently. Getting back again to where I started from, if you're not looking at things yet for students to get involved with, you really should. I know that many of our university colleagues certainly have flagged that as something that they're looking for in a competent application. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, David. And Jessica, from your perspective, Fusion Academy and all the students that you're working with there, how are you approaching this?
Yeah, I love how many of you talked about serving the whole student. That's definitely the approach that we take. While we want to maintain a high level of academic rigor and make sure that students are taking those college preparatory courses as they are ready. We also, and very akin to what David is speaking of, we want to make sure that they're accessing learning experiences outside of the classroom. And sometimes it's challenging in a small school environment, which is certainly what many of our schools are. And so it's really reaching out to the community, starting locally, seeing what is out there for students to access. So whether it's work experience, volunteering, community service, and of course, athletics, and then in school and out of school extracurriculars. We really, we don't necessarily have a prescription for schools as to what clubs they should offer. We really focus on a student-driven experience. And so we have such a wide variety of offerings that I know David mentioned letters of recommendation. I know I've personally written some. And I love describing all of the interesting ideas that our students are coming up with for things like clubs and just interesting projects that they're developing. And with our one-to-one model, students can really get in front of a teacher who's an expert in their field and get that mentoring if they're interested in a particular subject area. And I think all of that truly builds that piece of resilience. The more students are confident in what they're doing, the better that's going to be in the post-secondary space for sure.
Thanks, Jessica. And Kirsten at Singapore American School, how are you approaching this, especially with your angle and specialism around sort of social and emotional development as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a big social emotional learning, such a big topic that it's, I'll do my best. So, there's a few things that we're specifically working on at Singapore American School. So one thing we've spent a few years on is really developing our advisory programs. We have students that meet with us, a small cohort of students every morning. And we do have explicit social emotional learning instruction that happens during that time. But then I think it was Chris that was talking a lot about student voice. And we've also done that in our advisory program to kind of get student voice. Like, what are the topics you want to talk about that are relevant to you in life, and that could be in school or out of school. And then we bring those topics into the advisory to be able to give them space and time to discuss it. Another thing that we've really worked a lot on over the past few years is really leaning into the restorative practices model. And if you look closely at that model, it very much so aligns with the social emotional learning model. So we also use in our advisory programs like talking circles and things like that, just to build community, help students get to know one another better, give space for pause and reflection. And then we've been kind of working on, expanding that outside of the classroom. Outside of the advisory, because I think a lot of times with social emotional learning, like it tends to get siloed in these advisories or specific lessons here and there. But the real work and the most effective work is when it can be completely integrated throughout the day. So I've been really trying to lean into that more recently, which is kind of, it's in everything that we do. I like to think that teaching and learning and everything in life is emotional. We get jealous of our peers. We get, competitive with our peers. We get, we feel stress, we feel shame. We have all these emotions with learning, but we don't always pay attention to it. So how are we really being more intentional with that, even in our lessons and how we teach and how we ask questions and how we model for our students? What does it look like to fail? How do we show them how to do that in the way that we question and the way that we teach? And through that style of teaching, we're also building those social emotional skills and even, how to work in groups together, how to collaborate with one another, and build that resilience in the classroom, that it's okay to not get the question right. We all fail sometimes. And how do we pick ourselves back up and constantly modeling that? I think too, with the restorative practice model, one thing I really like is that it naturally leans into like the 5 core CASEL competencies, of, self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, social awareness, problem solving, because by its nature, when you are doing conflict resolution, you are building those skills. So that could be the school counselor, the dean, the principal, working with students. And then you're actually teaching those skills, like how do you work through conflict when it happens? And so that's something that we've been really intentional about in the school. And I think also the one last point is really kind of leaning into collaborative problem solving. And so that would be, that could look a lot of different ways. And so like on the high level, when we're looking at our school collectively, how are we, working together, getting student voice to kind of think about what programs best fit the needs of our students, but also even more individual. I know somebody was talking about, getting student voice even with students individually, and how do we bring their voice into their learning and into the interventions that they need, and kind of bring them into that process so they could really take control over their own social emotional skill development, and what does that look like in the classroom. So those are just a few things that we're working on at Singapore American School. So I'll hand it over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Kirsten. And Laura, from your perspective, working with Amity and also Minerva, so two slightly different contexts there. I'd love to get your thoughts and perspectives on that and how you're supporting students with these skills.
Sure. So I'll start with Minerva. So because Minerva is an online school, it's very different to your traditional schooling. What Minerva do, they have flips learning where students will go and learn first, and then they come to class already curious. So for me, I find that's quite great because it's a theory of heutagogy. So if people don't know what that means, is a theory and practice of self-determined learning where the student is the center, they are the primary agent, and that is built on self-efficacy and reflection. So students, rather than pedagogy where the teacher is a person telling the student, this is what you're going to learn, the student is then deciding, this is what I'm going to learn, this is what I'm curious about. And I'm going to mirror what David said, is really, really important, the depth of understanding through supercurricular. Extracurriculars are fantastic because it allows students to have the good struggle of, they're learning a new skill, they're learning a new subject, and they're not quite sure how to do that. However, the supercurriculars allows them to go deep into a certain subject. For example, if you're interested in doing medicine, you would perhaps read a medical journal. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily do in school. So this is allowing students to explore beyond their I guess their capability of what they believe that they could actually learn in school. In Amity it's similar but different as well. The supercurriculars is something that we really push for students as well. EPQ, learning something in depth again, and students definitely have the opportunity to explore, have their own I guess what's the word, for them to come up with something that they are interested in and pitch it to us. Why is that something that we should invest their time in? And it allows students to realize that actually their voice is important, what they think is important, what they feel is important, what they're interested in is important as well. So yeah, for me, the supercurricular student voice, I think everyone said everything, and there's not much I can add to it because it's all fantastic. Student voice is definitely something that I feel is very important.
Cool. Thank you so much. Jessica, I'll hand this over to you. And yeah, I know you're keen to ask the panel about balancing academic rigor and broader development. So that sort of potential tension, but yeah, getting that balance right. So yeah, Jessica, I'll let you take this next one.
Yes. So leaders often face tension between achieving academic outcomes and supporting student growth beyond exams. So how do you feel that schools can maintain those high academic standards while also helping students grow in confidence, independence, and resilience? And I would love to start with Christian on this question, just knowing your role at your school, especially.
Thank you. Well, it's a great question because I think it's something that, especially in international schools or in private school settings, results tend to be the main focus or the main driver behind everything, I suppose. Like a lot of families that are sending children to schools of that kind of nature are looking really for the next steps into universities. So I think linking back to what others have mentioned, like David having these super curricular experiences, actually just enrich the whole academic side. I think it's really vital that students are able to have these experiences that allow them to set goals towards what they want to achieve. And obviously, academic rigor has to just go beyond the classroom, as it was mentioned with an example about if you. Sorry, it was an example by Laura. If you were a student looking to apply for medicine, you can't just expect to have 3 A-star grades at A level or a high IB score and get in. You have to be able to have more things to talk about in your profile in your university applications, whether they be work experience or reading outside of the classroom, being in touch with the news, being in touch with developments within the certain aspects of whichever strand of education you're looking to go into next. I think it's vital that there's these opportunities alongside the academics, and being able to then bring that into the classroom through real world examples or real world teaching, and keeping the curriculum refreshed with what is happening globally. I think, for example, as a science teacher teaching biology, there's so many developments constantly that you can bring into the classroom, not just teach the base theories, but be able to talk about the most recent developments, get students to go outside of the classroom and look at what's happening in the world, what are the new developments in drug discovery, in medicine, in ethics, in law, and being able to really kind of constantly challenge students to think beyond just what do I need to do to get an A-star or to get a level 9 at GCSE or whatever it may be. I think the hard part of that is trying to get the students to buy into going beyond the textbook and going beyond the specification. It might be something that all of us as teachers have experienced. Students who just say, well, yes, but it's not in the textbook, or I just want to be able to get these grades or pass. So I think the challenge is trying to get students to buy into that. But I think what I found personally is the more they are challenged, or the more they have these opportunities for different pathways, to rather than just straightforward teaching, but these different experiences they could have, or different opportunities outside the classroom. I think once you've got that buy-in, it spreads very, very quickly, and it can be really powerful. I'll hand over to somebody else.
Thank you, Christian. Kirsten, would you like to add?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that this is always the tension right now. I work in Singapore, where there's a very, very, very high academic expectations. And a lot of times people feel that, if we're spending time on things like social emotional learning and, human, emotional development, that we're taking time away from the academic learning. So how do we balance that? And so one thing that I've been thinking deeply about is, like I said earlier, is just how much social emotional learning is already happening in the classroom, whether you realize it or not. It's just, how are we being more intentional about it, and how are we looking at it more deeply? So, that could just even be, the relationships that we form with students, creating and engaging instruction, like Christian's talking about, like, how do we help students have an emotional connection to what they're learning? How does that help them understand themselves better? How does that help them understand the world around them better? So, through the way that we teach, the way that we help students engage, the way that we design our classrooms. I know all of us have had experiences walking into many different classrooms, and it always has a feeling when you walk inside. And sometimes you have a cold feeling, and sometimes you have a warm feeling. But we know a lot of times that students do best in classrooms, and they actually excel the most academically in classrooms in environments that are psychologically safe. And so we have to work on building those skills. one thing I really have been leaning into more lately is kind of looking at social emotional learning standards, because we know we have the academic standard, but we also look at the social emotional learning standard and how can we integrate them. And the amazing thing that I love about the day and age that we're living in is that we do have generative artificial intelligence. And I find it to just be so helpful in some ways, just even just for the thinking part of how do you do that? Like, how can you put a social emotional learning standard and an academic standard together and not take any time away from academic instruction? And it actually helps you think through, because we know we shouldn't do exactly what generative AI is giving us, but it could actually help us get ideas and start thinking about this is actually possible and there is a way to do this. And I think that every environment is different. So, here I am in Singapore, very different from the environments I was working in Chicago. And so when we pick standards or we think about the culture that we're creating, we have to always be mindful of where we are. And that's why I do think it's always good to do this work collaboratively as well, because we always want to make sure that we're creating culturally responsive practices in classrooms, because emoting looks different in different parts of the world and different cultures. So we have to do that collaboratively and think about what are our goals in our school? What kind of environment are we creating? What do our kids need to be successful in the society that they live? And what are those skills that need to be developed? And then, how can we create that in classrooms? And the beautiful thing is that there's so many ways to do that where we could still push on the academic rigor. And in fact, most studies say that when you do that, you actually see greater improvement in academic outcomes by putting that time in to create a psychologically safe environment.
Thank you, Kirsten. And Chris, as the head of school, I assume that this might be on your mind.
Yeah, I would just echo many of the comments and the statements that I've made before. It's an interesting, when the contributors are talking there, it's interesting to think about where the academic rigor and pressure comes from in a school environment, in an international school. A lot of that obviously is within the school itself and the school group, but also the parents and the parental understanding and the parental pressure in terms of the academic standards and the results and rigor can change massively between different schools. For me, a big part of it is the expectation. What is the expectation that the students have and the parents and the families have as well? We've spent a lot of time talking, inviting workshops, school tours with parents to get them to understand what the academic school life should be like in 2026, and also that it's just more than exam results, and their buy-in, the parental buy-in, the family buy-in, the community buying of understanding of what we feel the balance should be between schools, skills, and academic standards is really, really important to allow you to be able to do that and not go down that sort of examination route. And when you do that, and you have that backing and understanding of the school community and the families themselves, you're able to be more flexible with the individual sort of pathway of each student and say, okay, the academic rigor may come at a different point in your school life. It may be pushed for 2 years in the future, or it may be immediately. We are able to put you in a slightly different individualized program in terms of your academic pathway. And that's great, because I feel at the moment, at long last, schools and the education debate in terms of the balance between results and skills is actually alive and kicking. And for decades, it hasn't been, for various reasons. But now, how many examinations should we do? When should we do them? Should we do them? How does that balance against skills? I've heard lots of good stuff about projects and EPQs, the wonderful skills, the wonderful failures, the wonderful dead ends that come with these projects is fantastic. And I feel at the moment the environment is finally there for schools to be able to plot that a little bit more. But I come back to my main point. It's got to be communicated clearly within the school and the school community, including the staff, including the families, including the students themselves. If you are going to do something beyond that traditional, this is the number of GCSE, IB, A-level results that we're looking at. And if you can create that environment and the communication is strong on that point, then I'm a big fan in terms of the flexibility that you can have. We all want this wonderful mantra of like an individual student pathway that, which you see around all of the schools, and it's great. And sometimes I have to reflect and think, okay, are we able to do that? How much can we do that? And understanding an expectation of families and students and the staff is very important and central to give us that flexibility to sort of create that balance is the way that I would approach it.
And so just moving on to the next question that builds on this. Students thrive when they understand their own growth and can take ownership of it. I know that something that we do at Fusion Academy is we allow students to choose their own adventure, if you will, in terms of how they are assessed. And so they might choose to take a multiple choice quiz or write a paper or even develop some sort of project that communicates the learning outcomes that we want them to meet in their own way. And so how do schools help students reflect on and articulate the skills they are developing in ways that are meaningful and authentic? I would love to hear from Laura.
Hi, thank you. That's a great question. So at Minerva Virtual Academy, what the whole system is, every single student has a mentor that they meet with every single week. During this time, the mentor will speak to the student about what they're struggling with, how their ownership of their learning is going, any reflections, and it also allows students to have some time for personal growth, to take ownership of that. If a student, for example, feels that they want to contribute to a club, an extracurricular club, they would speak to the mentor first. So the mentor is their first point of call. I find it's very, very supportive because it allows students to realize that they have a safe space to speak, and they have a safe space to make mistakes and ask questions and be unsure of where they are. And then the mentor will give them that time and give them the support to move on to the next step. It's great because us as counselors, we can speak to the mentors if the student doesn't feel comfortable, if not confident enough, they haven't built that particular skill at that time to speak to us. So we can speak to the mentor, and it really builds a great community for that student, for seeing that student as a whole child rather than just a number, or rather than just another person that may need support. So for me, I would say that having that mentorship is incredibly important, because not only does it allow us as counselors to know where the student is or where they are going for the next steps, it also allows the student to see that they are important, and that their voice is important, and it also gives them a place to speak freely.
And Joel, could you add on to that?
I should try. I think maybe if I look at perhaps articulating the skills, which was, I think the part of the question that really resonated with me, and how do they, as we develop these skills in our students, how do they then articulate those or reflect on how they're able to use those skills and be better as a result of having learned them. I think we also have to recognize that the parents that we're dealing with are now different generationally than they were 5 to 10 years ago, in the way that we work with our parents in terms of giving their children the space and the risk managed life rather than the risk averse life may be very, very different now than perhaps generationally 10 years ago, where it was very, very different. I think leadership is really important, and we talk a lot in our sort of international family of schools about staff CPD and how do we help staff grow and develop and become global and all of those things. But actually, an element of that is, how do we do the same things with students, and how do we create student CPD so the students are getting that growth and development through, whether it's international leadership, whether it's the ability to come together and work on problems across a global context, whether it's sustainability. It doesn't have to be classroom level. It can be wider than that. There are international programs like the MUN and things like that, which are fabulous for bringing students together globally and thrusting them all into a bit of a challenge. And I guess we're probably preaching to a choir here in this group. We know the benefits of it, but I I think finally I probably would reflect on my own, New Zealand country upbringing, where sport, or probably more team-based exercise, was part of the culture and the environment outside of school. And as I've developed and grown through my leadership journey, I think I recognize that opportunity for team environment, and that ability to reflect on people that are better, people that are not as strong in skills, and that understanding that the sum total of the parts is always greater than the individuals within that team context. And it doesn't have to be sport. I think the best example I've ever seen of it was Southampton Symphony Orchestra, with one conductor conducting so many different parts to an orchestra, better than any team that I've ever played in. But still, that concept of together we make something much, much, much better because of the skills that different people have.
Thank you so much for that. And David.
I would look a little bit I would actually start in brief. For a school to be clear on who they are and what's important to them. A moment ago, we were looking previously at something I was thinking about, and that is again, what do you want from a school? If you're a school and you're sitting in leadership, or you're a school and you're sitting on a board of directors, is your mission statement, getting kids into Ivy League schools or getting them into Russell Group schools, or are your values and mission statements more aligned with individual and personalized growth and development? And I think that's a really important place for a school to start, because I love my community. I still get excited, and I want to talk to kids about what's got them excited, because that's what a community does. When you look at and you give that kind of voice, and you give that kind of strength, and more importantly, confidence. I'm in with grade 9 students, and as early as grade 9, to talk to them about future planning, right? Who they are, and who they see themselves as, and what, if any, value is education going to serve for that. Is there a reason to go to university? If not, let's talk about that as well. So my take on that, as somebody who works in college counseling, might be a little different from others, and I hope we have that kind of bandwidth. But again, I respect the fact that in my own community, we look at the success of an individual, we look at the success of a child, not simply from getting a 40 plus, as an academic standard. I mean, I've got kids, bless their hearts. I got a kid who, for the first time in a long time for me, is predicted very high at 44 or 45. And I've got some who will do their best to scrape by passing the diploma program for the IB. But that is such a win for some. And I'm working with kids who, are on the spectrum. And everybody has a place. Everybody has a voice. And everybody has a chance at a future that appeals to them. So whether I'm talking to a kid who, like this year, we got a Cambridge acceptance, or I'm talking to a kid about community college, it's about meeting them where they're at. The outcomes for me might be a little bit different than some of the people in leadership as part of this conversation. But I value that. And I value a community, and I value a school who, I've not unlike what was said earlier, in this region, schools are incredibly, incredibly competitive. There's no shortage of parents to find good quality education here. You just have to be a really good consumer. So again, I go back to looking for schools that share your values, looking for schools who, they'll help a kid who is Cambridge material find that way, but they're also give just as much time and bandwidth to people who are going to start off at a community college, because everybody has that right through education. So I hope I didn't go too far, off reservation with that. But again, from my more limited lens in college counseling, I think it's important for schools to be clear on what their values are and who they're going to represent and what kinds of outcomes they expect to have.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jessica. We've just got a few minutes left. So, yeah, I was really keen to give a bit of time for some questions, and we've got a couple in here already. And I think one of them is the first one's particularly interesting as well in terms of touching on failure and how we integrate this as part of the learning process. So, yeah, I'd love to get people's thoughts on this question from Tracy. Have you experienced tension between student parent expectations around failure as part of the learning process? It's obviously a big question, and I'm sure we can talk for this is a whole separate conversation. But I'd love to get people's top line thoughts on this in terms of approaching this question with parents of students that you have at your school. Who would like to go for that one? Is anyone that would be keen to jump in on that question?
I don't mind speaking on this. Oh, Kirsten, if you want to. Okay. I've had quite a lot of experience directly related to this question, as one of my previous roles was director of STEM at a previous school. I think bringing the parents on board is a big factor in the sense of getting them engaged and getting them involved. I think it's really important to have parent engagement with the school, of course. And all schools do things like parental newsletters and keep parents kind of up to date with what's happening. But I think when you are doing those supercurricular or extracurricular experiences or taking students out to a particular trip or to a particular institution or having a big event, I've been involved in like planning conventions, for example, where we've brought multiple schools from the locality in, and being able to have parents even attend and being able to invite them, doing parental talks or having even parents come in as offering some of those vicarious experiences and giving parent voice to students and giving some more connections between them is important. But I think also being able to just have honest conversations with parents too and talk to them about it isn't just here. We're not just here just to get top results through hard study. There is, that there are meaningful reasons behind teaching failure, and actually it's a really important staging in anyone's development at school to make some of these failures now than maybe in the future where they're more higher stake failures. So if it is maybe a project or something like an EPQ was mentioned earlier, maybe I've had students that I've mentored for EPQs that in the end haven't finished or haven't completed it or have got a low grade, but have learned from the process that it's really important to meet deadlines, for example. And the kind of lower stakes failures are really good and important earlier on than maybe in the future where it's highest.
Thanks, Christian. Kirsten, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm actually doing a parent workshop on Monday on a similar topic. And so one thing that we're kind of leaning into in our conversation is even just about stress and anxiety, that there's healthy stress and anxiety, and then there's unhealthy stress and anxiety. And the healthy stress and anxiety, it means that you're pushing yourself. So if you're going to be getting all the answers right on a test, that actually means you're not learning. So you need to always be pushing yourself. So actually, sometimes it's good when you're not getting the answers wrong, because that means you're pushing yourself and you have more to learn, because we don't just know everything. And so kind of framing it in that way for parents. And you're thinking of that too when we're thinking about very high achieving students. But on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes there are students that just really struggle, and that could be for a lot of different reasons, like maybe they have a dyslexia or they have a learning need. And in those kind of situations, we really need to help parents understand different kind of learning styles and what success can look like for different students depending on where they're at. But I think, it's always kind of individualized depending on the student, but really just looking at, failure is not a bad thing. We're all individual, we're all understanding, we're all learning, and nobody knows everything. And so we need to look at it that way and what's healthy and unhealthy. Because sometimes we'll see parents putting so much pressure on students that it actually creates this high level of anxiety and stress. Well, they'll actually mentally shut down and start to kind of freeze on taking tests, and then they do actually fail. And so we will also talk to parents about the importance of, having that healthy amount of pressure on our children, but not giving too much that it could actually have the reverse impact that they would want to have.
Thanks, Kirsten. Any further thoughts as we approach the end of the session? Christian, I like that concept of creating safe environments for failure. I think that's especially interesting. And it goes back to our first session. Actually, there was one individual, Jamie Williams, who was the ex-head of the International School of Geneva. They've created a really interesting learner passport for their students, which sort of tries to encourage these skills as part of their academic journey as well. So maybe we'll add a link in there in terms of the takeaways after this session that we'll send around. Thank you everyone so much for joining. That was absolutely fantastic. And yeah, bang on time, just a little bit over. So like I said, we've recorded the session. We'll send around key takeaways, sort of key talking points that we went through. I know, Tatiana, I know you had a quick question. I think that was maybe for Laura. Laura, the mentors, are they teachers or are they external mentors? I believe it was at Minerva, I believe, for
Yes.
Tatiana.
Oh, okay. So the mentors they are specifically hired to be mentors. So we have SEN mentors, we have athlete mentors, and we have general mentors. So the mentors are they're specialists in their particular field, and they're the one who will be supporting students.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laura. All right, fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for joining. And I know our partners, Summer Course and Summer Discovery, want to open up a few scholarship places for registrants of this event too, and we'll send all the details in follow-up to this. So yeah, do keep an eye out for that. And thank you everyone once again for joining. Really, really fantastic session.